Hello all, welcome to the third section of the course, Styling and Animating. This section introduces you to jQuery's animation techniques and teaches us to hide and show the elements. Then we'll be adding effects and animations. Finally, we'll learn about the difference between simultaneous and queued effects. Now we move on to the first video of this section, modifying CSS. In this video we're going to modify CSS with Inline Properties. Before we jump into jQuery effects, a quick look at CSS is in order. In the previous section, we've been modifying a document's appearance by defining styles for classes in a separate style sheet, and then adding or removing those classes with jQuery. Typically, this is the preferred process for injecting CSS into HTML, because it respects the style sheet's role in dealing with the presentation of a page. However, there may be times when we need to apply styles that haven't been or can't easily be defined in a style sheet. Fortunately, jQuery offers the .css method for such occasions. This method acts as both a getter and a setter. To get the value of a single style property, we simply pass the name of the property as a string, and get a string in return. To get the value of multiple style properties, we can pass the property names as an array of strings to get an object of the property value pairs in return. Multi-word property names, such as background color, can be interpreted by jQuery when in hyphenated CSS notation, or camel-based DOM notation. For setting style properties, the CSS method comes in two flavors. One flavor takes a single style property and its value, and the other takes an object of property value pairs. These simple key-value collections, called object literals, are real JavaScript objects that are created directly in code. We use the .css method the same way we've been using the .addClass method. We'll apply it to a jQuery object, which in turn points to a collection of DOM elements. To demonstrate this, we'll play with a style switcher, as we did in section 3, handling events. So, we create our index.html file and add the code. Then we create a style sheet named 04.css and add the code for styling. We link this style sheet in our HTML file and run the HTML file. By linking to a style sheet with a few basic style rules, the page will initially look like this. Once we're done with our code, clicking on the bigger and smaller buttons will increase or decrease the text size of speech to its original text size. If all we wanted was to change the font size a single time to a predetermined value, we could still use the .addClass method. But suppose now that we want the text to continue increasing or decreasing incrementally each time the respective button is clicked. Although it might be possible to define a separate class for each click and iterate through them, a more straightforward approach would be to compute the new text size each time by getting the current size and increasing it by a set factor. So we first create a JavaScript file named 4.0.js and add this code. Our code starts with this line, and then switcher-large.click event handlers are present. Next, the font size can be easily discovered using the .css method, that is this line of code. However, the returned value is a string containing both the numeric font size value and the units of that value, px. We'll need to strip the unit label off in order to perform calculations with the numeric value. Also, when we plan to use a jQuery object more than once, it's generally a good idea to cache the selector by storing the resulting jQuery object in a constant. For this, we again create a JavaScript file. Here we name it as 4.1 and add this code. The first line creates a constant containing a jQuery object pointing to div class equals speech. Note the use of a $sign in the name, $speech. Since the $sign is a legal character in JavaScript identifiers, we can use it as a reminder that the constant is a jQuery object. Unlike in other programming languages such as PHP, the $symbol holds no special significance in JavaScript. Inside the .click handler, we use parseFloat to get the font size property's numeric value only. The parseFloat function looks at a string from the left-hand side to the right-hand side until it encounters a non-numeric character. The string of digits is converted into a floating point decimal number. All that's left to do is to modify the parse numeric value and to reset the font size based on the new value.f for this. We again create a new JavaScript file and add this code. For our example, we'll increase the font size by 40% each time the button is clicked. To achieve this, we'll multiply num by 1.4 and then set the font size by concatenating the result and px. Reference this in our HTML file and refresh the page. Now when we click on the bigger button, the text becomes larger. Another click and the text becomes even larger. To get the smaller button to decrease the font size, we'll divide rather than multiply. So let's create another JavaScript file named 4.3 and add the code. Here we're dividing the num by 1.4. Better still, we've combined the two into a single .click handler on all the button elements. Then, after finding the numeric value, we can either multiply or divide depending on the ID of the button that was clicked. The e.target.id value is used to determine the behavior of the click event. The size map is where these behaviors are stored. This is a simple object that maps the element ID to a function. This function is passed to the current font size value. The reason we want to use a map like this is that it's a lot easier to add or remove behavior than if we were coded as something like an if statement. For example, let's say the current font size was 10px, and the user clicked on the bigger button. Then the template string would result in 14px. It would also be nice to have a way to return the font size to its initial value. To allow a user to do so, we can simply store the font size in a variable as soon as the DOM is ready. For this, we create 4.4.js, JavaScript file, and add the code. We can then restore this value whenever the default button is clicked. All we have to do is add another function to the size map. Notice how we didn't touch the click handler at all to accommodate this new behavior. We created a new constant called default size, which will always hold the original font size. Then we just needed to add a new function for the switcher-default ID to size map, which returns the default size value. With a map like this one, it's much easier to change our click handler behavior. So let's add the reference to this JavaScript file and then refresh the HTML page. When we click on bigger, the size increases, and the moment we click on smaller, the font size decreases. When browser vendors introduce experimental style properties, they often prefix a property name until the browser's implementation aligns with the CSS specification. When both the implementation and the specification are stable enough, vendors will shed that prefix and allow the standard name to be used. In a style sheet, therefore, it's not uncommon to see a set of CSS declarations as shown here. If we wanted to apply the same in JavaScript, we would need to test for the existence of the DOM equivalent of these variations: property name, WebKit property name, MS property name, and so on. With jQuery, however, we can simply apply the standard property name, such as .css property name. If that name is not found as a property of the style object, jQuery loops through the vendor prefixes behind the scenes: WebKit, Moz, and MS, O, and uses the first one it does find a property, if any. With this, we conclude the video. We've learned to add styles to increase and decrease the font size.